In the United States between the year 1860 and 1900, around 14 million people migrated to the United States. During the Civil War, when labor was scarce, the federal government encouraged migration by passing the Contact Labor Act in 1864. This law allowed employers to enter into contracts with immigrants. Growing workforce and factory work. Children between the ages of 12 and 14 left school and started their lives in the workforce. Since children left school so early, they did not fully get a good education, and because of this, the only things they knew how to do was factory work. Workers received a fixed amount for each finished piece they produced. For example, they were paid a few cents for each item they produced. This system was called piecework. Those who worked the fastest and made the most money. Most piecework was performed in what came to be known as a sweatshop, a shop where employees worked long hours at low wages under poor working conditions. In 1860, most states had established a 10-hour working day, yet they had rarely enforced it. Thus, most laborers worked 12 hours, 6 days a week, and even more when they had to meet production goals. In 1868, federal law granted government employees an 8-hour day, but this did not affect private industry. Division of labor. Although its goal was to increase worker productivity, the methods used in scientific management brought about a change in relationship between the worker and the product he or she created. Artisans traditionally made a product from start to finish. Doing so required them to perform a variety of tasks. In contrast, factory workers usually performed only one small task over and over, and rarely even saw the finished product. The division of labor was separate tasks provided to be efficient, but it took much joy out of the work. Unlike farmers who had more flexibility in the place they worked, factory workers were ruled by the clock, which told them when to start, take any breaks, and when to work. In addition, discipline within the factory was strict. To make a profit, the factory manager needed to run an efficient operation. Thus, they might fine or fire workers for a range of offenses, such as being late, talking, or refusing to do a task. Workplaces were also not very safe. The noise of the machines could be deafening. Lighting and ventilation were often poor. Fatigue, faulty equipment, and careless training resulted in frequent fires and accidents. Despite the harsh conditions, employers suffered no shortage of labor. Factory work offered higher pay and more opportunities than most people could find anywhere else. Laboring in factory or mines was especially threatening to growing children. Many children became stunted in both mind and body. In 1892, social reformer Jacob Riis explained the impact of factory work on children in his book titled Children of the Poor. Riis wrote that people who spent their whole childhood on the factory floor grew to manhood and womanhood, with the years that should have prepared them for life's work gone in hopeless and pointless drudgery. Working families. By the end of the 1800s, nearly 1 in 5 children between the ages of 10 and 16 were employed. Girls sometimes took factory jobs so that their brothers could stay in school. By the 1800s, families in need relied on private charities. They had limited resources, so only the neediest received the food, clothing, and shelter that the charities had to offer.
Gulf between rich and poor. In 1890, the richest 9% of Americans held nearly 75% of the national wealth. A few of these individuals were drawn to the idea of socialism. The rise of labor unions. A small percentage of American workers did become socialists and called for an end to free enterprise. Far more workers, however, chose to work within the system by uniting to form labor unions. Early labor union. The early years of industrialization had spawned a few labor unions, organized among workers in certain trades such as construction and textile manufacturing. Strong local unions resurfaced after the Civil War. National unions also began to reappear at this time. the Knight of Labor. After National Union, the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labor formed in Philadelphia in 1869. Under the leadership of former machinist Terence Powderly, the Knights pursued broad social reforms. The leaders of the Knights preferred not to use the strike as a tool. The American Federation of Labor. A third national union, the American Federation of Labor, AFL, formed in 1886 under the leadership of Samuel Gompsters, a London-born cigar maker. Unlike the Knights of Labor, the AFL was a craft union. Gompsters and the AFL forced mainly on issues of workers' wages, hours, and working conditions. The AFL tried to force employers to participate in collective bargaining. The Wobblies. The AFL's policies didn't suit the workers. In 1905, in Chicago, 43 groups opposed to the AFL founded the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, or Wobblies. The IWW, which focused on unskilled workers, was a radical union that included many socialists among its leadership. Reaction of employers. By and large, employers disliked, feared union. Employers took measure to stop unions such as forbidding union meetings, firing union organizers, forcing new employers to sign yellow dog contracts in which workers promised never to join a union or participate in a strike, refusing to bargain collectively when strikes did occur, refusing to recognize union as their workers' legitimate representative. Railroad workers organized. The first major incident of nationwide labor unrest in the United States occurred in the railroad industrial. The violent strike of 1877 touched off a wave of strikes and bitter confrontation between labor management and the government in the decades to follow. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877. The strike began in July 1877 when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad announced a wage cut of 10% in the midst of a depression. It was the second wage cut in 8 months. Railway workers reacted angrily. Workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia, were the first to declare a strike. When they tried to prevent others from running the trains, Debs and the American Railway Union. At the time of the 1877 strike, railroad workers mainly organized into various brotherhoods, which were basically craft unions. Deb believed that the violence of the 1877 strike had resulted in part from the disorganization and corruption that existed within the brotherhoods. As a solution to this problem and except to avoid future violent strikes, Debs proposed a new industrial union.
Strikes rocked the nation. From 1881 to 1990, the United States faced one industrial crisis after another. Some 24,000 strikes erupted at the nation's factories, mines, mills, and rail yards during these 2 decades alone. Haymarket, 1886. On May 1, 1886, groups of workers mounted a national demonstration for an 8-hour workday. On May 3rd, at Chicago's McCormick Reaper factory, police broke up a fight between strikes and scabs. A scab is a negative term for a worker called in by an employer to replace striking laborers. Using scabs allowed a company to continue operating and to avoid having to bargain with the union. Union leaders called for a protest rally on the evening of May 4th in Chicago's Haymarket Square. A group of anarchist radicals who oppose all government joined the strike. Anarchists addressed workers in fiery speeches. To many Unionists, the anarchists who took part in the Haymarket riot would be heroes forever. Pullman, 1894. Like the strike of 1877, the last of the great strikes involved the railroad industry. Gregory Pullman invented a car known as Pullman cars. They were so successful that Pullman needed a steady source of labor to meet growing demands. Built in 1880, 12 miles south of Chicago business district, town of Pullman provided its workers with everything they could possibly need: parks, a miniature lab, school, a theater, a church, and even sidewalks lined with shade trees. Pullman held this town to high standards, which workers sometimes viewed as Pullman exercised too much control over their lives. In May 1894, a delegation of workers went to him to protest. Pullman fired 3 of the workers, an act that led to the local union to go on strike. Pullman refused to bargain and instead shut down the plant. 1 month earlier, the ARU had achieved success when they supported striking workers on James J. Hill's Great Northern Railroad. Other Debs was also hesitant to join the strike. The delegates of the ARU voted to support the strike and called a boycott of Pullman cars throughout the country. Widespread local strikes followed. By June 1894, some 2,600,000 railway workers had joined the Pullman strike.